Welcome to Football Never Sleeps, the aspiring to be viral, caffeine-craving, never-ban-booing, NIL-deserving weekly YouTube show all about Notre Dame football and the sky that isn't falling around it, even though it might feel like that in some news cycles. I'm Eric Hansen, your mood regulator here in South Bend. He's Tyler James, working hard in LaPorte not to flash a frowny face. And together we are the content creators at InsideNDSports.com. And tonight we're a three-headed monster as we welcome teammate and former Notre Dame offensive lineman Bob Morton to join us and raise our collective football IQs. On tonight's show, we'll break down the latest coaching staff / roster churn, including who might be the next defensive coordinator for the Irish. We'll do the same regarding the general manager's position after Chad Bowden bolted to USC last week. Recruiting, maybe a lightning round, and definitely your questions. To start filling up the question portal and buckle up, this is Never Sleeps.
He makes that look easy, doesn't he, Bob?
He does. I'll tell you what, that's the next level stuff from you, Eric. Good job.
It is, and the music's playing all over again.
I
wanted me to do it again.
I'm making it look less easy by having it loop on accident, so apologies for that. I was too excited to compliment Eric to prevent it from doing that. But welcome in, everyone, and welcome, Bob, as well. Make sure that you are subscribed to us here on our YouTube channel, which costs you nothing. That allows you to get in your questions during the show and lets our content populate into your feed whenever we post a video. We'd also like for you to join us over at InsideNDSports.com, where you get access to our premium analysis and recruiting coverage and special access to us on the Insider Lounge, where we share our inside information first, like when Eric was the first person to indicate that Jim Knowles wasn't going to return to Ohio State days before he accepted the Penn State defensive coordinator job. You can try us out over there with a 30-day free trial using promo code NDYT. There's a link to subscribe in the video description below. All right, Eric, the steering wheel is yours.
Okay, we are starting tonight with our opening drive, where the coaching staff churn will lead us. And we're going to start with defensive coordinator. And it appears Chris Ash is the front runner and perhaps the imminent replacement for Al Golden, who's moved on to coordinate the defense for the NFL Cincinnati Bengals. So let's start with what do we, if this actually happens and it is Chris Ash, what do we like about this? What do we maybe have questions about? Let's start with Bob first.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I was expecting after listening to what Coach Golden said just today, even about leaving Notre Dame in a really good place, which I agree with him and think that he did. I think that for me, I was probably expecting maybe like internal promotion, like seeing what we see with the Detroit Lions maybe happening, at the college level with Notre Dame. The fact that we're considering bringing somebody in from the outside, I think it really has to be someone that adds something kind of to the salad bowl that we have on our coaching staff. I think the experience that he has at the NFL level, the college level, the head coaching experience is all something that kind of fits the same bill that the Al Golden was able to bring in a few years ago. What I'd like to see is a continuation of the evolution of really developing a strong front seven and finding unique and exotic ways to get pressure and confuse quarterbacks. I think that's something that we are better at today than we were 3 years ago. But I also think there were times this year, specifically late in the year, where we struggled to get that pressure unless we were really bringing the house. And you can't just get that with a zero blitz every time. So excited about the name coming in, excited about the experience that he brings on all levels, and would really love to see him continue really the same type of drive that Coach Golden has done for the last few years.
Before I go to Tyler, I will add that as part of this scenario, Mike Mickens would stay. He would get a bump in title and a bump in salary, and I would assume a bump in responsibility. So I think that's a big win. What say you, Tyler? What do you think about this scenario if it ends up playing out without a big left turn here?
Yeah, I think I would echo a lot of the compliments that Bob said. it really does seem like a different rendition of the Al Golden hiring if it does in case indeed follow that way. That he has so much experience as a coach. He's been a head coach. Certainly didn't work out for Chris Ash as a head coach. And he's been a successful coordinator at multiple programs. We have to put the
mature. We have to enunciate well.
We have to put the mature rating on this video. But in terms of like the questions I have for it, one that where you mentioned, Eric, like the idea that Mike Mickens would stay, I think I would want to make sure that did happen. Like it might be that way for now, but would it encourage Mike Mickens to maybe consider leaving later in the cycle or next year? I think that would be a concern of mine. Other concerns would be why hasn't Ash been a coordinator since 2020? And then even this past season, he was a scout. He wasn't even an assistant coach. What has sort of gone wrong there at the NFL level? And sometimes it could just be a product of the teams he was with, like didn't have successful head coaches. And so it's hard to stay as a position coach, which may be the case. There's so much that happens when an assistant coach is hired or a coordinator is hired that we don't really know, like, okay, how's this going to work out? I think we're all guessing when it comes to a lot of that. But I think in terms of the bullet points on his resume, they seem to make sense and fit in with what Marcus Freeman has valued at defensive coordinator. I think maybe the other unknown would be that how does he fit in with Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman's culture? That would be an important thing.
And I think that's a question that I have, but also it's an element of trust I'm extending to Coach Freeman in the sense of I think of his coaching hires very similarly to how I have seen him work in the transfer portal. Rarely are we seeing Notre Dame pulling the number 1 or 2 transfer out of the portal. But I think when you look at the success he's had at pulling guys that are a culture fit, pulling guys that contribute on the field in a way that's necessary, and ultimately pulling value adds for the team this next year, he's done a really good job of finding those fits. And so while Chris Ash might not be the splash name that maybe some of us as fans were expecting, or even like the continued development name that some of us internally were maybe expecting. It's one of those things that he knows what the culture of his coaching staff is and what it's going to take to bring it to the next level. And so if he sees those qualities in Chris Ash, I'm excited to hear from him what he sees beyond just a big name that's available.
So a couple of things I'll share and just kind of digging around today and yesterday, there were 3 names that Marcus Freeman looked at external candidates, and we can talk about the other 2. Chris has more NFL experience than the other 2. And I think the NFL experience is something that Marcus Freeman valued some. I don't think it's a breaker or a deal breaker, but I think it's something that he liked. The head coaching experience, even though it was bad head coaching experience, 8-32 at Rutgers, got fired a third of the way into his 4th year there. He did inherit Rutgers at a bad time. They had some real bad discipline problems when he took over. They were just pretty new in the Big Ten, and they got whomped during that time. So he didn't last there long, but sometimes you learn good lessons from real painful ones. The Texas thing I thought was interesting. That was the last time he was a defensive coordinator. They were only 64th in the country in total defense that year. It was Tom Herman's final year there, and yet that was a 33 step up in what they had been the year before. That was his only year as coordinator at Texas. And this is the most important thing. When he was at Drake and he was a defensive back at Drake, he was a supervisor for a corn detasseling crew in Iowa. So
why did you lead with that?
I buried the lead, didn't I? So the other 2 people that were allegedly in play, and again, I don't, Jim Knowles, I know, was asked to be included, and maybe that was to raise the price for Penn State. And then Jim Leonard, from who we think of with Wisconsin, but has been with the Broncos this past season. So let's say Marcus had the run of all 3 of those guys. Do you think Is this the name that you like the best, or would you have preferred one of those other ones? Bob, how about you first?
Okay, so all cards on the table, assuming that all three of those we have an equal chance to get. I think Jim Knowles is the guy that I'd want to pick out. You look at what they were able to do with the talent they had, what he was able to do. His play calling elevated the talent that they had throughout the entire course of the year. And I think ultimately we want to play a defense that is able to create pressure, that is able to stop the run, that is able to turn the ball over like they were. I think the experience that he has coaching elite defensive players is the type we would want to bring into this scenario. So yes, on paper, if all three are equally opportunistic for Notre Dame, I think Jim Knowles is the higher. That being said, it does not seem as though that was the case.
If this makes you feel any better, before I go to Tyler, Chris Ash had a video years and years ago called Playing the Aggressive 4-3 Defense. So I don't know if it still applies, because that was in a different era of football before spread offenses were really big. Tyler, how about you? What do you think about those other guys?
Well, I think it would be hard to imagine Marcus Freeman hiring someone that wasn't aggressive. I think the biggest reason to have trust in this is because Marcus Freeman is a defensive coordinator himself. Yeah. He should know more than anyone what he needs out of his defensive coordinator. So that gives me more faith in what his decisions end up being in this case. But yeah, like Bob said, I think it's hard to argue against Knowles as the best option given what he has done as of late. I don't know that I see a huge difference between Ash and Leonard. I think he could have convinced me either way on those two, but I think Knowles would be ahead above those two.
And we are taking your questions. We don't have our send us questions thing, because then you guys wouldn't know who Bob Morton was. Would be cover up.
Oh, actually, it moves Bob, but then Bob's name tag goes away.
But it doesn't have his little name tag.
Yeah, I know.
Okay. So before we go to the GM role, do we want to take some questions, Tyler, or do we want to roll into the GM news?
Let's see. I think a few of the questions. Oh, here's Jeff Stevens asked related to defensive coordinator. Do you think Al Golden had some advice or input on the person to replace him?
I would think Marcus would ask him. I don't know that Al and Chris would have crossed paths, but I'm sure that Jim Tressel had some input into this because I was reading an article where Urban Meyer was really happy with the 2 years he got out of Chris Ash at Ohio State. That would have been 2014, the year they won their last national championship. And then 2015, he actually coordinated the defense. He was co-coordinator, but he was calling the plays against Notre Dame in the Fiesta Bowl at the end of the 2015 season, toggling between his new Rutgers job and finishing out at Ohio State. But I know Urban Meyer, well recommended. I know Barry Alvarez has a stamp of approval. Barry wasn't the coach at Wisconsin when Chris was there, but he was the athletic director, and he was pretty involved.
I think he'd probably be a fan of Jim Leonard too, though.
Yes, I think he would be a fan. I'm probably a Bob Morton.
Yeah, listen, but I'll say this, right? Do I think that he had some input on it? I would say yes. I think one of the things that we can't overstate is how special it is to have a coach who was not secret about what his plans were after this season. I mean, we were all speculating, but I think it was pretty well known in-house that Coach Golden was looking for this type of opportunity. I think he would have had a chance to have this kind of opportunity last year. He wanted to build something that was going to outlast him. He did build something that is in a really good place. And I think when you have someone who's been open, who's been honest, who's really cared about the development of this program and this defense, I think you listen, hey, coach, what do you think this program needs in a leader? And whether or not you go with that way, what a great step of conversation it is, rather than being completely taken by surprise that he's going to go find a job elsewhere, like other programs are, at this time of the year. And so this is a step of continuity, even though we're looking for a new name to take this position.
I thought I'd throw this in. Domer Grizz says, since it's clear you have to have an epic beard to be on the show, does that mean we need one to ask a question to? No beards required. We will be asking for no facial recognition to to submit a question.
But if you want to say whose beard is the coolest, I would welcome that. And I also, if Rajon is around today, you have until the end of the day today. You actually have until tomorrow to claim the sticker. If not, I have to go to the post office because somebody won this fabulous prize, a 1966 media guide in my chat for using excessive exclamation points. I'm going to the post office on Wednesday, and I'm only going once. And so if not, it's going to Quebec to Olivier. So, Rajon, here's your 2-minute warning. Okay.
All right, cool. We have some more questions. Let's get into the GM stuff, and then we can follow up with the GM questions that are here, and then we have a lot of O-line questions, which I know we'll certainly get into O-line talk.
Yeah, we're going to get into Bob's wheelhouse. So late last week, Chad Bowden leaves for USC. He was the general manager for Notre Dame football. His status is elevated. He actually came with Marcus when Marcus was the defensive coordinator. And they had a hiring freeze at the time. So he had to be a defensive analyst, but he didn't do that. He did recruiting stuff. And then his role kept expanding. And then once he got to USC, he made a statement about them having better resources at the new place, which I think endears you to your new fan base and makes other people really mad. So I'll start with Tyler on this one. After Chad flirted with Michigan last winter, is this necessarily a disaster for Notre Dame? Was it time to move on, or is this a big catastrophic potentially loss depending on who's hired?
Well, I wanted to start with this statement. I went back and looked at what I saw, and he certainly was complimentary of USC. I'll read the quote here, and maybe there was another quote that I didn't see. It said, USC's total commitment to excellence makes this a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. This is a place with the resources, facilities, and support to build a perennial winner, and I'm excited to get to work to help bring more national championships to USC. So I didn't see that as a comparison between Notre Dame and USC.
Well, I didn't see the direct quote, but I saw people interpreting. They said USC had a double the NIL budget and stuff like that, and they felt like it was a shot to ND. I didn't, but I just wondered. You're way more into the weeds with recruiting, so maybe I don't speak the right language.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think people could interpret it that way. I just think it's clear to make. I think it's important.
I got a lot of frowny faces on Facebook.
I think it's important to say that Chad himself didn't say what I think was attributed to him by some people. Yeah, I mean, the resources for him were certainly more. I mean, the amount of money he's been reportedly making $1 million at USC, and that was more than double, almost triple what he was making at Notre Dame. That the resources for him are certainly increased. In terms of, is it a disaster for Notre Dame? I think it's definitely a shakeup. I think Chad was better on the recruiting side of things and had, I think, greater designs on being more of the GM, and was slightly shifting into that role at Notre Dame, and not more than slightly. He had officially last year. I think he had maybe done a little bit of that behind the scenes before that, but I think there's sort of two different jobs that are becoming relevant in college football now. A GM that's in charge of roster management, and then someone that's in charge of recruiting. And I think his best asset was as a recruiter. I think he wants to become more than that. I think he has shown some signs in 1 year at Notre Dame as the general manager of someone that's able to do that. I mean, I think you could point to the fact that Notre Dame only had a handful of transfer portal guys going out as a sign that he's was doing a good job of making sure that Notre Dame was retaining guys, because he was actively doing that in the week leading up to him eventually leaving for USC. So Notre Dame's going to have to ramp up its recruiting efforts and make sure that there isn't a loss felt there. But I do think that Notre Dame can sort of make up for the loss of him as a GM with the subsequent hire.
In talking with Tom Lemming this weekend and today, Tom feels like, Tom is a longtime recruiting analyst. He feels like the GM role is as important now as the offensive coordinator, the defensive coordinator, with everything that goes under it. But it's not just the GM, it's the staff. There's a director of scouting, Matt Jansen, does an amazing job. I mean, he's scouting the portal from July on, for example, and having those resources committed. So, Bob, do you have some thoughts on Chad Bowden leaving and the importance of this hire?
Yeah, I think it's a massively important hire, right? We are in the midst of just a huge transition in how things are run within a football department as a whole. And I think, like, Tyler really hit on something, that there's really two components of this. And I think Notre Dame needs both of them, right? They need to get a hire who can handle that general management and that roster management and just how the program is going to run. And then I think the recruiting piece that Chad might have been best at is something that our coaching staff is also pretty good at. And so, we can weather the storm until we get a new hire on that recruiting standpoint. But I do think in this kind of new world of, these football programs being run the way they are, we need to make sure that we get this job right. And so maybe Chad's not the guy that can go 3x in salary at Notre Dame. But if that's going to be the going rate for someone, then we need to go and make sure the person we get can do the things that Notre Dame needs them to do, because this is a really interesting point of inflection for the Notre Dame football program, right? Because on a year where Notre Dame, gets to every level of the college football playoff except the championship, except winning the championship, there's a lot of money that gets infused into the program. And so, we want to make sure that we do that again. And so, this year is a year that all eyes are on South Bend. We need to make sure in years to come, where they may not be on South Bend, that we have the infrastructure in place to do the recruiting and the program building that needs to be done. So I don't think that the Chad Bowden loss is a catastrophic loss. I do think that this is an essential hire, and I think needs to have as much emphasis on this as there is our defensive coordinating position.
You guys are too clever in the comments, because you're going to make me laugh, and those guys are going to think I'm laughing at their answer. So I'm not looking over there. How about if we go to another round of questions before we jump into the portal stuff?
Let's do that. All right, let's start with the GM related questions. Let's see. Scott Fegan says, who will the new defensive coordinator be and the new GM? It sounds like a co-coordinator situation. Is this the best approach?
Okay, for the coordinator situation, yes, I do, because I think that keeping Mike Mickens is a big deal this year. I think, especially as close as we are to the start of spring practice, to have that continuity, to have an elite recruiter, to have a guy that has helped you to the number one spot in pass efficiency defense each of the last 2 years. I just think Mike Mickens is a rising star. He's 37 years old. Chris Ash is 51. The other two guys that were playing, I think Jim Leonard is 42 and Knowles is 59. So they're all younger than me, but we're all but Mike Mickens, I think, could get a really good defensive coordinator job. And this keeps, I think, some really important continuity in a lot of good areas. And just look at the recruits he's bringing in.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. And then as for the GM, I think it's sort of the same. Like, I think, and for the record, I have heard indications that is something that Notre Dame is looking at. I don't know for sure who it's going to be, the next GM. Patrick Sudds was a name that John Bryce of Football Scoop highlighted as someone that Notre Dame was interested in. And North Carolina's had certainly a program shakeup this offseason with Bill Belichick coming in, and Michael Lombardi is now the GM there. My understanding is that Patrick Sudds is still an employee for North Carolina, but just working in a bit of a different role. So maybe he's been a GM at a couple places, so maybe would make sense to bring him to Notre Dame. But I think you hire a GM to do the roster management stuff, and then sort of amplify guys you already have on campus with Caleb Davis, who's the director of recruiting, and Carter Allman, who is the assistant to the GM. Those guys have experience recruiting to Notre Dame. They're younger guys and they're good relationship builders. And I think those are sort of two things. I think it would be helpful to have those two things separate, because, like, if you're the GM and you have to make these hard decisions about X player deserves X amount of money, or X player we need to encourage to move on. Like that might be harder if you spent time getting to know him as a high school recruit and convinced him to come to Notre Dame in the first place. So I think maybe a division of sort of responsibilities there makes sense in the long run of where college football is heading to.
Let me throw this at both of you guys. I'll go to Bob first.
Sure.
There's some guys with Notre Dame ties and NFL experience are actually in the NFL. Do you think looking at somebody in the NFL rather than somebody that's in college makes any sense at this point? Are we just not far enough down that road yet that those models are congruent enough?
Yeah, I think that it really depends on what you want this role to look like. I think in terms of roster management, if you're talking about, let's use the term salary, because I think we all know we're kind of moving that direction, with the internalizing of these collectives now to under the umbrella of the university. I think if you're looking at somebody like that who's going to be doing the year-to-year roster management and program development, I think that is somebody that you could pull from the NFL. I think the scope of recruiting, though, is so big. And the evaluation of 16, 17, 18, even younger year olds, and the working with parents. You're not just offering a salary. I understand that we've gotten into a place where money talks, but at Notre Dame, we're still recruiting people that are not just looking for top dollar. And that's what we've been hanging our hat on. I think bringing in somebody who has been operating in just a money talks environment like the NFL to come down, it goes a little bit against the ethos of Notre Dame trying to be excellent in all areas. And so I think you've got to find somebody who's done it successfully at the collegiate level, or you've got to have a pretty firm divide between the recruiting and getting people in to the university side and the people who are already here and managing that roster, because I do think that can be done excellently by somebody who's been in the general managing office at the NFL level.
Yeah, I think Bob nailed it. Go ahead.
Yeah, one thing I'll mention too today I talked to a recruit last night, Braden Robinson, a 4-star wide receiver, and it was just interesting to hear his perspective. Now, I think this kid's pretty grounded, but he said, when we came on our visit, it was his first time to Notre Dame. He said, football and education and all that. He goes, but it still matters to me a lot that the people care about me. It matters that because if they don't, then none of the other stuff matters. I thought that was an interesting thing from a 17-year-old kid to say that. And he's from like your neck of the woods, Bob. He's from Red Oak. Do you know where Red Oak is in Texas?
It's been a long time since I've been down that way. So no, I don't know where Red Oak is.
It's south of Dallas. So
well, there you go. I was north of Dallas, so we just never crossed the city line, I guess.
Okay. All right. So more questions, Tyler?
Yeah, I think we've hit mostly on this, but we can maybe sum it up. Jeff Stevens says, for the GM role, what are the top 3 responsibilities? And can that person be expected to really be a leader in recruiting, or is it more of a CEO role?
Tyler, why don't you take that one since you deal with it the most?
Yeah, I mean, I think my opinion, and I think where Notre Dame is heading with this, is that it's more of a roster management one is responsibility. I know that's sort of broad. Transfer portal, like both additions and retaining, I think those, and then sort of NIL, like I think those are like probably the top 3 responsibilities. And I mean, all those things work together. Like what Bob was talking about, like when you're talking about salaries with NIL and the money that's being allocated to these people, like, okay, is it worth us investing this amount at this position? Do we need more money at this position? And how do you make those decisions? I think that is where the model of college football is heading, and that's where this GM role is continuing to sort of evolve into, and more of that, more than sort of the recruiting and being Chad Bowden running around with a boombox in a leprechaun outfit. Like, I don't think that's what the future GMs will be doing in college football. That's more the recruiting side of things.
As long as he can detassel corn, I'm happy. Okay. Let's go to the next question.
All right. Mike DeVoy says, do you think ND will go to the spring portal for another cornerback? I'm hoping Christian Gray gets better, but need to get some more depth.
Okay, we'll jump into the portal stuff after this. I don't think so, unless they lost somebody else. So you have Leonard Moore, you have Christian Gray, you have Carson Hobbs, and there's 3 really good freshmen coming in, including Dallas Golden. I think Mark Zachary's probably camera ready too. And Mike Mickens is so good at getting young, talented cornerbacks ready to play. Is Tay Johnson stay at cornerback? I'm not sure. Will Chance Tucker stay on the roster after spring? He tore his ACL right at the end of training camp. I don't think he's a guy that you count on for big snaps. And then they also have Devontae Smith coming in to play the nickel. So they can kind of look at that in the spring and see if anybody leaves. But I also think there's an expectation that Christian Gray is going to get better.
Sorry, Eric. I think not only get better, but which I think naturally happens, right? We're not dealing with the NFL where a guy in his second or third year is who he is forever. Like these are young men who are kind of growing up and getting better. But I also think let's look at Christian Gray's year last year. For the first 6-7 weeks of the year, I mean, he was doing a fantastic job against the other team's number 2. Right? Like that was his role at the beginning of the year. And then with the Morrison injury, he goes and he starts covering the number 1. He starts getting exposed a little bit. And then obviously Leonard Moore starts stepping up as the number 1 DB. But whenever you saw Christian Gray really giving up the big plays, it was the opportunities when he was against the number 1 receiver on the other team. And you know what? Like as the number 2 DB, it was a good year, start to finish for him if you add the whole thing. And he's got key areas where he needs to get better. And I think that when you look at the DB room that they have right now, I can't remember a time since I came to Notre Dame back in 2002 when there was not only great DBs on the field, but they were great DBs on the bench getting ready to get on the field. And so I feel like the continuity that they have with bringing in Devontae Smith at the nickel, I think they have what they need to not only have 2 guys that are studs ready to go next year, but also to handle any injuries or anything that come their way. I think Christian Gray is your guy. I think he's going to have a great, let's call it a rebound year only because of how it ended. But I have nothing but faith in 29 to go ahead and have a step forward next year.
Tyler, do you want to jump in on this?
I would just say I agree. I don't know that it's a top need for Notre Dame in the portal. I would have confidence in Christian Gray moving forward.
I want to point out a couple things about Christian Gray and Leonard Moore. From the USC game on through the entire playoff, they missed 1 snap. So there wasn't anybody rotating in. So and in the Penn State game, Penn State's wide receivers had 0 catches. Christian Gray had an interception that set up the winning field goal in that game. He also had a big interception in the USC game after he was getting picked on. So I'm not sure that I'm ready to say, well, he can't play, because he certainly is showing a lot of resilience. And I would like to see what Christian Gray does in the spring and moving forward. I think it's a great question.
And it's a position they've recruited. Yeah, they've recruited well at, and that's why the depth isn't as big of a concern as well.
Okay.
Let's get into some of the transfer portal stuff, and then I think there's at least one other transfer portal question that we can get to.
Okay, so there was a 5-day window that ended Saturday night for Notre Dame and Ohio State players to hit the transfer portal, and there was also a 4-day window for underclassmen to declare for the draft. It had closed for everybody else, and it's a little bit tricky because guys that were in the 2020 class or the 2021 class and that had redshirted, they automatically go into the draft, and you have to opt back into school by February 7th. So there may be still some guys that opt in or don't opt in and still go. A guy like Tosh Baker, for example, or Kevin Bauman, not saying that they would, but they are in that category. So what happened? We had 6 players submit their names during this past week for the portal, 3 from December. Of the 6, 4 were offensive linemen. So and there's also transfer portal April 16th through the 25th. So either of you guys, let's start with Tyler first. Are you guys surprised by either the number or who the people were of players in the portal for Notre Dame?
Yeah, and Domer Grizz says, or asked if we were surprised that Notre Dame didn't lose more players in the portal last week. In terms of players being surprising, I think Sam Pendleton is the most surprising to me because he still has a bright future, I think. Pat Coogan and Rocco Spindler only have one season left, and they weren't necessarily going to be guaranteed starting jobs. Jaden Thomas, Deion Colsey, they've been recruited over year after year in the transfer portal at wide receiver, so it makes sense that they would leave. Ty Chan was someone that was a bit buried on the depth chart, so not a ton of surprises there. I did think, like, if you're saying, okay, Notre Dame's going to lose some of its interior alignment, I don't know that I would have thought that they would have lost the combination of Pendleton, Coogan, and Spindler. I thought maybe one of those would stick around. And in terms of Notre Dame not losing more, I think it's difficult to – the timing makes this hard. Like, if you want to go somewhere, classes have begun other places. Like, other schools are maybe a little bit more flexible than Notre Dame is in terms of adding someone and bringing someone in, and maybe it's probably easier for a graduate student like Pat Coogan or Rocco Spindler. But if you're an undergrad transfer, the clock was ticking fast. And so I think we're probably going to end – my guess would be we'll end up seeing more spring exits in the transfer portal for Notre Dame than we're used to because of the way the season played out.
Right. And before we go to Bob, let me add one thing where the numbers are. They're at 96 scholarships now. April 7th is the next court date where we're going to get maybe some clarification on whether that 85 limit's going to be raised. Bob, how about you? Are you surprised by any of the portal stuff?
Yeah, I'll say this. I'm not surprised at all. And I actually want to go ahead and put on like a hat of celebration for some of these guys. You look at Deion Colsey, you look at Jaden Thomas, you look at Rocco Spindler, Pat Coogan. They're taking their Notre Dame degree and they're going and giving kind of one last shot somewhere else to try and raise their stock when it didn't look like Notre Dame was going to be the place for them to raise their stock. You look at the story that Rocco Spindler and Pat Coogan were able to tell this year, and it doesn't get better than that maybe for them, right? Because after this entire year of being ready, being next man up, Pat Coogan with a 13-yard reception, like all the things that happened for them this year, next year they might go back to number 2 or be buried even lower. So an opportunity to go ahead and be a starter somewhere else and give themselves to be a second or third day pick, I think you have to capitalize on that. So I'm not surprised by them. Am I surprised by Sam Pendleton? I'm not surprised. I'm a little sad and disappointed from Notre Dame's perspective. Obviously, we saw a lot of tremendous upside when he was in earlier. He was a mauler in the run game. There were some areas in pass protection that he played young. He wasn't quite ready. And then when Billy Schrauth came back, that was the place that Billy came and took that position from him. And that can be a really hard thing to wrap your mind around. And so I would have loved to have seen Sam kind of come back in and push for the top 5 or 6 next year as well. That's not the case. He's going to go and he's going to make a run at Tennessee. I do think our offensive line depth is going to show why we are kind of O-line U and why we just need to take a deep breath. We have to remember all of the celebration we can have on signing day. Like, we can't just like commiserate and be sad on transfer day because we've had just a huge hoard of resources on the O-line. If you saw what I saw and you realize that your left tackle position is somewhere between Anthony Knapp and Charles Llagasa, and you've got to figure maybe both those guys are on the line next year, there's not a spot for everyone. And so some people want to vie for a starting spot, and it wasn't going to happen in South Bend.
Very good. Okay, let's go to the next question.
Yeah, we got a super chat here from Rob Obermeyer. Thank you, Ron, for the $5. When these guys decide to go into the portal, do they have to make their coaches aware of their decision before they do it? Just wondering.
Bob thinks he has a tip jar now.
I'm taking that exactly that. You know what I mean? Also, by the way, I think that the gentleman who said that we're tied on beards, we just have to wrestle for it, that was just a safe way of saying that I win. That's it.
That is a safe way of saying it. I definitely the third place finisher in that contest. So what Marcus Freeman is really good at doing is being transparent and really talking about these kind of decisions all the time. They're giving the guys great feedback. This is what you need to do to change your situation. This is what your situation looks like. And I think that's one of the reasons Notre Dame has such good retention because there is that communication. I think at times, if there were some blind spots with Brian Kelly, I think sometimes he wasn't a great communicator with that kind of stuff. Now, he didn't have the transfer portal rules that Marcus is dealing with now. He has them at LSU, and that's a big revolving door in and out down there. They had a really good portal acquisition year, but Marcus is really, really good. So they're usually 99.99% of the time not surprised.
Yeah, in terms of the process, you have to file paperwork to enter the transfer portal. You can't just like say, "Hey, I'm in the transfer portal." So
you don't just do it on Twitter.
Yeah, although that is part of it anymore.
You have to have a graphic.
So the program will become aware of that. I'm not sure if it actually has to pass through the hands of the coaching staff, or I think you could maybe just go to the compliance department and say, "I want to enter the transfer portal." I don't know the precise logistics of how that all works. But they're going to find out eventually, and it would not be good to just do it without talking to your coaching staff about it, because those are the people who are going to be your references at wherever you want to go next. Like the next coaching staff that's recruiting you is going to probably reach out to your former coaching staff to see how you handle things at your previous school. Okay. All right, let's get into.
I don't know anything about the transfer portal, guys.
Bob,
if you have questions, don't ask Wisconsin. They haven't figured it out.
We had a couple of similar questions. Keith Nagy said, "Do you think the 3 O-linemen who transferred would have been starters in 2025?" And Scott Fegan said the same thing. "We lost 4 linemen in the portal. Some big time experiences lost. Did you see any of them starting next year?" So,
okay,
Eric or Bob, what do you?
Let's talk about who might be in line to start next year. So let's take inventory, and then I got some specific questions. Sure. So we know Emil Wagner. We figure Ashton Craig, as long as that knee holds up, and I had a story today about where he stands with his rehab. And we know that Billy Schrouth. So those 3. And then you would figure Charles Jagaza and Anthony Knapp. And then there's some others that could challenge. And there's always a surprise, like Sam Pendleton was one of the surprises this year. I think Sullivan Apsher could be a guy that pushes. Kirby Lambert is a guy that could push, and Will Black walking in the door as a 5-star lineman. So let me go to Bob first before we kind of sort through those. And I think the biggest question is Jagaza and Knapp. Who's a better guard? Who's a better tackle? Which one would you push to guard? Which one would you want as your left tackle, if either?
Yeah, this is a really, really good question. And I think there's, to say this beforehand, my current starting 5/6, I don't expect to be the starting 5/6 come next year. I just think there's some of that growth that you're talking about, whether it be somebody who's already in the building, whether it be a freshman who's coming in. I think it's really a really fun time to see how some of these young guys like a Will Black might push to start as well. Watching Jagaza come back to finish the game at guard and then watch him play tackle, the thing I love about him is just his intensity in run and pass blocking. And so I think that he could handle any of the 4 non-center positions. I don't know if he can snap, but for me, I loved what he did so much that I would love to have him at guard as just a fast foot mauling guard who can pass protect, run block, has experience, can do anything that you need. Similarly, I think that Anthony Knapp, when I look at him, one of the things I talked about very early in the season is he's a guy who tends to be heavy-handed, right? What I mean by that is, when he punches with his hands, he likes to get his hands and leave them on somebody. And when you're dealing with speed out on the edge, that can be really hard with somebody who laterally maybe spins or uses a counter move. He got beat inside a little too much for me to be super comfortable with. I think you take his 6'4" frame and move it inside, and all of a sudden some of the lateral moves kind of dissipate. You've ended up getting another fast guard or center. My starting 5, just as of right now, is I want to see a lot of growth from like a Kirby Lambert, have him at 1 tackle, have Emil Wagner at the other. You're going to have kind of a Schrouth and Jagaza at the 2 guards. Craig at center, and then you've got Anthony Knapp, who can do all 5 of those positions. It's like an NFL style. Like your top 6 guys are going to play. And I think whether that's he plays center, I know he can do that. Whether it's moving into guard, he has the skill to do that. He'll push at all of those positions, and you've got a lot of skill behind that. So that's my pick for the top 6 right now. Cannot wait to see these guys play in the spring and then when fall ball comes around.
Okay, before Tyler weighs in, this is my take. Kirby Lambert doesn't have a beard, but he would win the wrestling match and win the beard contest. Okay, because he looks like
we don't
the
stand
guy
a chance
that would be the
Kirby.
best lineman on the team. I'm telling you.
Yep.
Okay,
I
Tyler.
think there's like 3 variables that I want to know more about before feeling really confident in what the line looks like. One is Ashton Craig ready, which we think is possible. But guys are always typically confident going into that until it comes time to actually playing. He's still a ways away from being able to test out that knee in real offensive line situations. Is Kirby Lambert ready? Like, because that changes the calculus with who your left tackle is. And then is Anthony Knapp truly capable of playing center, which I think Joe Rudolph believes he is, because that was one of the positions he put him at as a freshman before in early workouts before it became obvious that Notre Dame needed a tackle and he could use him there. So I think those are the 3 things that need to play out to determine like what this line looks like. I think a perfect scenario is if Kirby Lambert does emerge, it's basically the line that Bob laid out, like Kirby Lambert left tackle, Billy Strouth left guard, Craig and Knapp battling it out at center, Charles Jagusah at right guard, Emil Wagner right tackle. I think that would be an excellent offensive line. I would be curious, like Anthony Knapp's your starting left tackle as a freshman. How does he handle if he's your backup as a sophomore? I think that would be a tough pill to swallow. So that's an interesting sort of wrinkle into the situation too of how he would handle if he's not able to land a starting job. Like why would he? And if Craig's ready to go, maybe you leave Knapp at left tackle, and maybe Kirby Lambert just needs some more time to cook as well. And that, I think he'd be comfortable with that too.
And what I'm kind of hearing from both of you is if Ashton Craig isn't ready, Knapp could handle the center.
I think so.
Yeah, I do too. We saw him a little bit, didn't we, in the spring? Didn't he dabble with center a little bit?
Yeah. I think he had started at right. The positions he was working at primarily when he first got to Notre Dame was right tackle and center. He was doing both of those. And then obviously ended up at left tackle by the end of preseason camp.
One thing that I and we can talk more offensive line, we can go to more questions, but the one thing that I thought was really positive about the transfer portal is we're going to have a quarterback competition in the spring. It's not just going to default to somebody. And I like the fact that those guys are going to push each other, that there are going to be 4 of them, 4 scholarship guys right now. Now, again, at the end of spring, maybe not, but in the spring, they're going to definitely, and that transfer portal won't open up until I believe spring practice will be over. So Tyler, do we have any more questions portal related?
Chris says, do we have depth if and when injuries occur? I assume he means on the offensive line. So that's probably best to address now since we're talking about it.
Yeah. Listen, Chris, this is what I would say is we're kind of laying out the case 5 or 6 guys, right? But as both Tyler and Eric have said, right, you've got some monsters who are coming in, including 5-star Will Black. You've got a Sullivan Absher who's already here on campus. You've got what I love about the season that we had is we had a lot of not junk time, but like future time to watch some of these guys play in the 2 deep later on in some of the games during the middle of the year. I think that we've got a lot of people that can provide depth, not just in spots for the 2025-2026 team, but this really is developing as a unit that can continue to grow in the years to come. So just as we were talking about the DBs being a strength and having the depth to grow over the years to come, I think the offensive line's in a really, really great place in terms of recruiting, development, versatility. Coach Rudolph's really done a great job over the last couple of years.
This is completely unrelated, but I thought of this because somebody in the Insider Lounge on our message board asked me this question, and he wanted me to ask Bob. So, Bob, I don't know if you even follow Pro Football Focus film grades, but when you played, did the coaches go over film grades with you? Did they have a number, and did you feel like it made sense and so forth, or
yeah, we didn't have any type of outside grades or anything like that. We just kind of we would essentially have a plus minus, double plus, double minus system as we went through kind of our plays in terms of what the expectation was given, whatever it might be, right? So you might have a left guard and left tackle who both kind of screwed the pooch and both got minuses, but it was really the left guard's fault, so he got the double minus, right? So I got more minuses than like a Ryan Harris, in any given year. But that was all the kind of grades that we handled, right? So the Pro Football Focus grades that are coming out now, I would love to know how those come about, considering that people are trying to figure out, maybe what the play call blocking scheme is as those things are submitted and come out.
Well, we did have Dalton Wasserman on our show, and he explained some of it. But I think where there's confusion sometimes is, for example, this is a defense. RJ Oben had a higher score than Howard Cross, and that just doesn't seem possible for the season. So that also perplexes me as well. But I think a new terminology with Pro Football Focus should be "screw the pooch."
I've had one "screw the pooch" today on tonight's show when I let the intro song loop over. So try to avoid another one.
Here you go, double minus for you.
Okay, and any more questions? Or are we moving?
Yeah,
on?
Well, I wanted to chat. Like Sullivan Absher is someone that I didn't talk about when I was talking about the O-line. I think that is someone that deserves mentioning. I think there's confidence in his ability, his depth. I think Chris followed up and said experience depth, and like the only reason Notre Dame had experienced depth this season was because its experienced starters lost the starting jobs, and so it's not something you really can manufacture without guys losing their jobs. And so I don't. Yes, if say Pat Coogan and Rocco Spindler and Sam Pendleton all decided to stay and then they lose their jobs, then you'd have experienced depth. But that's just, I don't think it's a very realistic scenario in today's college football era that you're going to have experienced depth. I think it's depth that you trust is what you're going to have to look for the most.
Okay, Bob, let me ask you, having been an offensive lineman that started, that was a reserve and so forth, how much difference is game experience than practicing, and how much difference is live bullets, high leverage game experiences versus mop up against, Southwest Michigan College?
Yeah. Well, I mean, listen, I think that, playing live in the fourth quarter, kind of in future time, is still a world of difference than getting plays in practice with guys that and that you've seen day after day after day. Even when you're going against, when I would do scout team my freshman year when Jeff Fain was a starting center, I'm going against Cedric Hilliard and these guys, but I know their moves after like 3 weeks, and so I'm able to tailor what I'm doing to make them better, but also to not get embarrassed by Big Ced. So you end up with a familiarity where their game slows down for you. Well, then when you go against these other guys who may not be as good as Ced Hilliard, then all of a sudden, like, the game speeds up to like, oh, there's another level to this. And I think college practice is a step up in speed from a high school game. I think any game time is a massive step up from a college practice. And then I think a starting college game is another step up from that future time that you have in the fourth quarter. But I do think getting those reps in a game with the crowd around you, with the scoreboard going, getting those game scenarios, it slows your heart rate when you actually get in the time that really matters. So I think having more people play those, like the 4-game window that you can still redshirt, is a massive thing of growth for young players, because they're able to get that experience without losing the year of eligibility. And when their eligibility starts the next year, their heart rate's a little bit lower in game one than it would have been if they didn't have those 4 games of experience the previous.
Okay. Tyler, do you have anything to add, or are we going on to the next?
No, Bob's much more of an expert there than I am, so no need to add anything.
Okay, another question, or do you want to move on to the next topic?
Yeah, I got some more questions for us. Which 4 players do you believe will be in the interior defensive line rotation at the end of spring practice?
tomorrow, I don't know that all the transfers are here. In fact, I know they aren't. I'm not sure which ones are here and which ones aren't, but I think we find that out tomorrow. But let's assume all of them are here. I would say Heinisch is definitely in that mix. Gabe Rubio, Dawson from Louisville. And then I think it's a real crapshoot among the young guys like Sevillano, Mucum, Brennan Vernon, guys like that are going to really be fighting to move up. Maybe the USC transfer gets in the mix, although he didn't play a whole lot at USC in the 2 years he was there. And they may need to pull in somebody else from the portal. We don't know Jason Anye's status. My guess is he's not coming back, but that hasn't been made official yet. He hasn't played since September.
Yeah, I don't know that we can count on what his status will be, so I would exclude him from the conversation.
Yeah, I think whenever you get into a rotation, it's really hard to know because that rotation can be altered over the course of the spring. Right. I mean, there are people doing kind of their own personal prep right now. By the end of the spring, you might have a top 4, top 5 that you really feel good about. But then all of a sudden somebody comes back and they've changed their body completely over the course of a couple months of the summer. There's a lot of time between now, even though it does feel like a really short time. There is a lot of time between now and when we kick off against Miami for somebody to really kind of climb the ranks. I just want to go ahead and say, right, like I think Rubio really did a good job kind of coming in and being that second level behind Riley Mills and did a great job kind of filling in as the number 1-3 technique for the end of the year. And I am radically excited to see what Donovan Heinisch continues to do to kind of grow his body and his skill set. Little undersized for a nose right now to take on the point of attack, gets a really good pressure on the quarterback pretty regularly. If he can put on, 10, 15 pounds and still maintain the quickness that has kind of been in the Heinisch family here at Notre Dame, I really think that he could be kind of a game wrecker inside. And so to have somebody that can back him up is going to be important as well. Really excited to see. It's probably the biggest area of growth for our team is the front 4. And I'd love to see what those interior guys grow into this spring and summer.
Yeah, I would. Eric said the 3 guys that I think are probably locks, right? Dawson, Rubio, and Heinisch. And if I had to pick a 4th guy right now, I think Mucum would be the guy, Armel Mucum, because I just feel like he had separated himself from those others, even though he didn't necessarily get that playing time this past season. I do think he was still ahead above of Sean Sevillano, Devin Houston, Brennan Vernon. Vernon's a guy like Bob was mentioning, someone that's going to – I know Brennan Vernon from talking to him before the Sugar Bowl. He's working on it, improving his body and making sure that he's in a better position to take advantage of interior reps because he had moved from the defensive end position.
Yeah.
So he could be a guy that maybe isn't even that competitive in the spring, but by the time the fall comes around with the weight that he puts on, maybe he can get more seriously into that conversation. All right. Scott Fegan says, what are the areas that will be considered concern position groups for next year? And did the portal help these areas?
For me, tight end a little bit. I don't see a clear. I mean, you would think Eli Reardon, but Cooper Flanagan had the Achilles tear in the playoff, and that could be a 1-year rehab, so he could miss the whole season. So there's a lot of young tight ends there. You have numbers. I just don't know if you have the quality. The wide receiver position has to come on. I mean, there's some interesting transfers, and there's some interesting young guys like Cam Williams and Logan Saldate. Certainly Jaden Greathouse is great in the playoff. And I think interior defensive line, we were just talking about that. Those would be the 3 areas that I would kind of highlight and say, those would be the ones that you want to, rub the rabbit's foot for, or whatever you do to bring luck.
Yeah, that's why
go ahead, Tyler.
And that's why they're at least attempted to address those positions in the portal. Now, the Flanagan injury happened after they had already added Ty Washington, so we'll see if Notre Dame tries to add in another tight end still. But I think those are the biggest concern positions. I think less a concern and a question mark is still quarterback. Like you can't just assume that the next quarterback is going to be great, right? Like they have to prove it. And so that will be a question mark. I'm not concerned because I do think there is talent and ability at that position. Whereas those other positions, I think there's maybe some big question marks there in terms of, okay, do they have the talent there to be able to be at the level that Notre Dame wants to be at?
Yeah, I think for me, it's defensive line. I think that's really the concern for me. I think when you look at how we matched up in a lot of different ways against a lot of different teams, I think the defensive line is the area that I just want to see more production from in terms of not just being disruptors, but like kind of game wreckers. You know, can we get someone who can get off the edge and get to the quarterback? I think the other thing is it's not a concern position group. I just want to see continued development from our linebackers. You know, that game against Ohio State, that first half especially, a lot of those big plays were because of kind of missed – when linebackers missed a fit. They missed a hole and Judkins got loose. There were a couple other times that, you know, some maybe third downs could have been fourth downs if somebody would have just really hit into the line there. The other thing I'll say is, you know, offensive line is not a position group that concerns me, but again, want to see growth. I think we were really, really good at getting a hat on a hat and blocking people. But what you want to see when you have a group that's supposed to define your team is you want to see a bit of dominance. Mm-hmm. And I would like to see more blocking to and through people and really blowing people off the line. Reason why tight end's not a huge group of concern for me, Eric, is while I understand Notre Dame's history of having tight ends, I also understand our play callers' history of spreading things out. And I think that we are getting more and more weapons that we want to keep on the field that might be of the receiver or running back variety. And so I think you can have two and maybe a third younger tight end that can kind of fit into a rotation. And maybe we don't have as many 3 tight end sets as we used to, but we're able to find a way to put position groups out there that are really dangerous. Dare I say, we have 2 running backs on the field at the same time. So that's really what I want to see, you know, kind of grow is the offense and defensive line. And I think we're getting names in on the defensive line that could really grow, but how those kind of mesh together in a new system will be really important.
Bob, I'm not agreeing with you just because I don't want to lose a wrestling match. But when I did talk to wide receiver Braden Robinson, one of the things he said was Mike Denbrock showed him LSU film. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yep. I would say that would be interesting.
Speaking of wide receivers, one last question here I'll get in from Ed Straub. Do we need a better wide receivers coach?
I'll start there. Mike Brown is the wide receivers coach. I think this is a big recruiting cycle for Mike Brown. I have heard nothing but good things about his development, but I do think wide receiver recruiting needs to be good, and Notre Dame had some good ones in this weekend for Junior Day.
Yeah, I think that, you know, do we need a better wide receiver coach? Ed, I'm gonna say, like, I think this is a big year for that, right? Like, I know we want to have the best of the best. I think that if we're continuing to see growth in recruiting and we're starting to see the guys that we knew could be top tier talent play as top tier talent, then all of a sudden I feel a whole lot better next year than I do, you know, the first half of this year. How much of this year was our receivers not getting open, and how much of it was receivers getting open, but our quarterback was already getting ready to run downfield? So I think that having an offense that's really based more in the air is going to be really interesting to see. Are our receivers really up for that task? I could see a world in which we're really happy with our receiving room next year, depending on how we're throwing the ball out of the backfield.
Yeah, I think it's hard to judge Mike Brown so quickly in terms of what he was asked to do, and with the wide receiver room that wasn't exactly loaded with talent. So I think giving him more time to show that development on the field, and then, yeah, as Eric said, like the recruiting aspect is something that definitely needs to improve, in my opinion. But they did have some talented receivers in this past weekend, and we've heard some good reviews coming out of the visits as well. All right, that's all on the question front, Eric.
Okay, let's do lightning round real quick. Tyler, recruiting, anything of note from Junior Day that you would like to share?
Sure. Yeah, Notre Dame hosted its Junior Day on Saturday. There were 8 guys who came to campus with offers that were uncommitted. 2 more were offered while visiting, Ebenezer Ewatade and Evan Goodwin, a defensive end and offensive tackle. Notre Dame's in a good position with a handful of those guys. I dropped an intel piece on the Insider Lounge earlier today. I think multiple of the visitors end up in Notre Dame's class eventually, and I think if you read that, you probably get a good sense of the best bets that may end up in the class. Nothing is imminent right now, but there could be some decisions upcoming, and certainly if you look back at last year at Notre Dame's January Junior Day, there were a handful of guys that ended up committing to Notre Dame after being a part of that weekend, and I think that could be the case once again.
I did a story on what happened in the open locker room after the national championship game. It's been debated a lot, who was at fault and so forth on social media and in our Insider Lounge. Bob, I'm just curious as a player, if there was an open locker room policy during a playoff run or whatever when you were a player, what would you think of that? Would you want the media in there, out of there? Do you care? I know you were media friendly, but what would you think about that?
Yeah, this is one of the things I really was excited to kind of talk about, because while I think anybody who's a fan of Notre Dame really knows kind of what happened, and Eric, I think you did a really good job of just kind of calmly and really unbiasedly just saying, like, here are the facts that I know. Here's kind of what happened. I'm going to go ahead and like put my emotions into the situation. So there was a game while I was here where I watched a teammate put his hand essentially on another teammate's neck and like choke him out against the locker. And it was an emotionally charged situation. They had to be pulled apart. That emotion lasted for weeks and weeks until things were kind of dialed back down. But those two individuals were individuals that I knew both. I loved both. I care for them both. And a lot can happen in those really emotionally charged moments. It was a really big game that we came out on the losing end of. And if you took a snapshot of that locker room in that moment, you would think that our team was in utter chaos, and we weren't. And it was just in the moment. And so when I imagine one of my teammates who's in kind of this emotionally charged place, as an individual, let alone as just a member of the team, who is kind of being singled out, and I don't want to say picked on, but is being kind of singled out and prodded by a member of the media that's not like a known and trusted figure who's been around like yourself, gentlemen. I just, as one of the calmest guys who was on my team, if I was in earshot of what was happening to Christian Gray, I would have been very forceful in telling this media individual to move on. And so the chaos that ensued, or however it's been reported, I want to go ahead and say that is more a sign of a healthy locker room and a dysfunctional member of the media than it is a dysfunctional locker room and an appropriate member of the media. And that's just my take as a former football player.
Okay. Well, Bob has lots of takes on Facebook. Are you going to continue that into the off season?
Yeah, I'll find a way to continue that. I would just like to say to you two and to anybody who's watching, I just want to say thank you. A lot of you know, if you don't, back the night after we beat Penn State, my mom, who'd been battling early onset dementia for several years, breathed her last and kind of made the transition from this life to the next. And so I've been a little absent on some of our after game, into the end zone videos. I have not really kept up to date on social media, and just for you two guys who've been so cognizant of just my emotional healing and time that I needed, and for the family of your guests and your fans who have kind of reached out to me personally, I just want to say thank you so much for the thoughts, the prayers, the support. She lived a wonderful life. She brought me to Notre Dame. That's a story for another day. But I just want to say thank you so much to just the Inside ND Sports team, the family. You guys have been wonderful to me. Thanks.
Well, you're our MVP, Bob. Sorry, Tyler. And sorry, me. I'm missing myself, too.
I'll gladly take third place in this trio, so I'm happy with that. We appreciate all the time you spent with us, Bob, and I know everyone enjoys hearing from you, and I'm glad we could have you on today. And obviously, as you know, we have been thinking about you and certainly understand you taking time away, and glad you could get back and talk some football with us today.
Absolutely.
Bob and I will do an end to the end zone before spring practice starts at some point. Tyler and I will be back next Monday, I believe, and I'll have a live chat on Thursday of this week, Thursday at noon, for everybody that didn't get their questions in. And I'm telling you, Rajon, the clock is ticking on getting this fabulous prize.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for us tonight. Like Eric said, we'll be back with Football Never Sleeps next week. Make sure you check out his live chat later in the week. And make sure you subscribe to us here on YouTube. If you're not subscribed to us over at InsideNDSports.com, NDYT, the promo code gets you a free 30-day trial. Check that out and have a good week.